Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Monarch, Legacy of Monsters. It was called Secrets and Lies. And they kind of did a thing like they did last week. They dropped it early, except this time by 2 whole nights, which is really cool. I'm guessing they didn't want to compete with Black Friday. Anyway, it aired on Wednesday night instead of Friday, which is awesome. And I'm going to give you my recap and review. So as it starts, Colonel Shaw, Kate, her brother, and May make a daring escape from the facility where Shaw was being managed after deciding to find the kid's dad. In a flashback to 1954, Dr. Miro, Randa, and Shaw welcome Shaw's commanding officer to a facility where they're storing the giant plaster cast of a footprint of a very large monster, which we know is Godzilla. They asked the general for, I think they said 150 pounds of uranium to use as bait to get the monster to show itself so they can photograph it and study it. And he agrees to give it to them after bristling at the idea at first, when it's made plain to him that they need to learn all they can about it because it represents such a threat. Back in the present, Shaw and the Randa siblings get to talking in the van that they used to escape from the facility, and it comes to light for the siblings that the siblings' father, as well as Shaw and their grandparents, knew about the existence of monsters, which troubles Kate because she doesn't understand why they didn't warn anyone or try to stop them, at which point Shaw explains that that's exactly what they were trying to do, stop them. Her frustration not allayed by him saying that, Kate gets out of the van, and we see that the van is one of many vehicles being transported over the ocean on a very large ship behind a surrounding three-way wall of, giant shipping containers. Back in 1954, on Bikini Atoll, Dr. Mira, Randa, and Shaw find that the Army has decided to give them their uranium in the form of a bomb, which they weren't expecting. Back on the ship, in the present, May makes a sort of secretive phone call and then throws her phone in the ocean before yelling at her ex, the brother, for dragging her into this, because apparently it's cost her business and so forth, because now she's on Monarch's radar. Shaw convinces the rest of the pack that they need to ditch the data tapes because apparently where they're going is Korea to see a friend of Shaw's for help, and he didn't want the tapes raising any suspicions. When they actually get to Korea, they end up causing a scene anyway, but turns out that this allows them to find Shaw's friend, which raises the question of what he was talking about with not raising suspicion. Anyway, a Monarch executive, meanwhile, arrives in Japan and orders the other people from Monarch that we've seen before to go to Korea to get Shaw. After all, not only do they want him back so they can continue to manage him, but they want the data tapes, which of course they're not going to get now. Speaking of Shaw, he and the others are taken to a plane by Shaw's friend so that they can fly to Alaska. So I guess they were in Japan, they went to Korea, they wanted to get a plane from this guy to fly to Alaska. That's how they had to do it, I guess. In 1954, the Army is waiting for a monster to show up, and they do in fact encounter Godzilla. When they're about to set off the uranium bomb after Godzilla approached it out in the middle of the ocean, attracted by the radiation, Dr. Mira tries to disconnect the device sending the signal to the bomb, but isn't successful. Thereafter, outside the presence of the general, Dr. Mira, Randa, and Shaw make a wink-wink, nod-nod pact to keep certain information they might come across while looking for the other monsters or investigating monsters from the general. And the pact relies on Shaw trusting them to tell him everything he needs to know, but not necessarily things the general should know, so that things can be kept from the general without Shaw lying to him. In other words, a plausible deniability pact. Back in the present, when the plane that left from Korea encounters some crazy anomalous storm, Shaw takes control of the plane from his friend and does some fancy flying before effecting a super crazy landing on a mountain in some kind of snowy location, I guess in Alaska, where they find the siblings' dad's wrecked plane and the deceased pilot, but not the dad. Just beyond where all the plane's pieces are strewn about, they found a tent set up, and upon investigating it, they realize it was set up by the siblings' dad after he survived the crash, but once again, he's not there. Shaw's friend, who's investigating the parts of the plane, comes across the tow rope and realizes that the siblings' dad's plane originally landed safely and did not crash. but that it was instead destroyed by a monster attack after landing. And as they try to escape before the same thing happens to them, the plane is destroyed with Shaw's friend in the cockpit by an ice-breathing monster creature thing. And that's where the episode ended. So once again, I did like this episode. I like this show. I think it's intriguing. There's an interesting mystery, you know, what's on the tapes? What reason do they have from hiding it from the public? I mean, aside from the obvious, is there any particular reason? At what point did Shaw end up in the facility? How long has he been in there? He says in the episode that at one point, Monarch, which they set up, by the way, which is interesting because so far it's kind of been portrayed as the bad guys, but they originally set it up. But he says it eventually became about bean counting and, you know, bureaucracy more than it was finding monsters and dealing with monsters. And so that's how he ended up being ousted or whatever. So I think that's an intriguing mystery. And, you know, I want to know what happened to the father. Obviously, that's the big mystery. Why did he keep a separate family? Was it related to his work? Was it not related to his work? Like, did he need it as a cover, or did he just do it because it's something that happened? Is he alive? What the hell monster is that that breathes ice on everybody and everything? And on top of that, there's another mystery. And I didn't think of it last week, but I should have, because they kind of brought it up in this episode, but then brushed it off. So I don't know if anything more is going to come of it. I kind of hope it does, because if it doesn't, it's kind of stupid. But in my last review, I mentioned how I liked the fact that Kurt Russell's son is playing the younger version of Kurt Russell's character in the 50s, while Kurt Russell is playing the 2015 version of his character in 2015, because obviously they look alike and it makes sense. The problem is that Wyatt Russell in real life is 37. So if he's 37 in 1954, going by when that would have made him born, which is 1917, he would be 98 years old in 2015. And Kurt Russell is 72 and doesn't look anything like a 98-year-old person. So what are they doing? Like, okay, you wanted to set the past sequences in the 50s rather than the 70s. That's cool. Then why did you set the present day sequence in 2015? It's not 2023. So they didn't just go with the current year. They picked a relatively recent year. But why couldn't they have picked a year that made more sense? Like, why didn't they pick like 1980? So that the character could be 72 years old and not 106 or whatever, 96. So that's weird, unless they're going to explain it, that his exposure to radiation over the years somehow changed his anatomy. But see, normally that degrades your anatomy, not augments it, and makes you live longer. So I don't know. I'm hoping they explain it, because it's goofy otherwise. But yeah, as I said, I'm liking the show. And they did have more monsters in this episode, which was interesting. Godzilla, who we know did not die in the explosion, right? Because he attacks San Francisco in 2013 or whatever on the timeline of the show. And we've now seen the giant bat-like creature and the freezy monster breathy creature. So I'm liking that. I want to know who May was talking to on the phone, what that's about. And, you know, I think it's a fun show. This week, they didn't do the crazy thing with the flashbacks where they start in one era, then go back, then go forward. They kept it strictly 50s, 2015, 50s, 2015, but each time period was linear. So that made sense. I was glad for that. And this week reminded me a little bit more of other things. Last week, I said it reminded me of, you know, Westworld, and I guess in a way Lost too, because the flashback, flash forward thing is kind of a Lost thing. This week, it reminded me a little more of Indiana Jones. We had some dun 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 type moments. So that was cool. So anyway, I'm enjoying it. Kurt Russell's great. Wyatt Russell's great. The young lady that plays Kate is very attractive. So I'm enjoying the show. And I think if you're not watching it, you should check it out. But that's really it. I'm going to get out of here for now. I'll be back to do a breakdown and review of next week's episode once it airs, which is supposed to be Friday, but who knows? Friday, the 2nd of December. Because they're going to skip this Friday, obviously. So who knows? But I'll be back to do it whenever it's released. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.